The funeral hall felt like it was holding its breath. Nobody expected the police dog to climb into the coffin. Nobody expected him to curl his massive body around the little girl's still form and refuse to leave. But when Stahl's dark eyes locked onto Officer Raymond Cole in the back of the room, and when that low, menacing growl rumbled from his chest, everyone knew something was terribly wrong. At first, they thought it was grief. The 100-pound German Shepherd had always been drawn to 5-year-old Tracy Cooney, breaking protocol just to see the shy girl who whispered secrets through the precinct fence. But this wasn't mourning. This was a warning. "Easy, boy," Officer Marcus Blake whispered, approaching slowly. "She's gone." But Stahl wasn't listening. His ears flattened, hackles rising, as his gaze never wavered from Cole, the officer who'd filed the accident report. The man whose patrol car had struck Tracy 3 days ago on Maple Street. The case closed within 18 hours as a tragic, unavoidable accident. Stahl's growl deepened, vibrating through the small white coffin. Blake felt ice in his veins. In that suffocating moment, surrounded by grief-stricken mourners and uncomfortable colleagues, one impossible thought crystallized: what if the dog knows something we don't? Before we dive in, make sure to hit like and subscribe. I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The sanctuary of Riverside Memorial felt like a tomb itself. Rows of mourners sat frozen in wooden pews, their faces masks of disbelief and sorrow. The air hung thick with the scent of white lilies and barely contained grief. No one should have been here today, saying goodbye to a child who still believed in fairy tales and left cookies for police dogs. At the altar, beneath stained glass windows casting colored shadows, sat a small white coffin trimmed with delicate lace. Inside lay Tracy Cooney, only 5 years old, her blonde curls arranged carefully around her peaceful face. She wore her favorite pink dress, the one with tiny pearl buttons, and clutched a well-loved stuffed rabbit. She looked as though she was simply sleeping, untouched by the violence that had stolen her from a world she'd barely begun to explore. But it wasn't Tracy who held the room captive with shock and confusion. It was the massive German Shepherd lying protectively beside her in the narrow coffin. Stahl's powerful frame curved around the little girl's body, his black and tan coat a stark contrast against the white satin. His muzzle rested gently against her curls, and his dark eyes, usually alert and professional, were fixed with laser intensity on something in the crowd. When mourners shifted in their seats, trying to see better, a warning rumble emerged from deep in his chest. Gasps echoed through the hall. Women pressed hands to their hearts. Men in police uniforms stood rigid, uncertain how to handle a situation no training manual had ever covered. This wasn't protocol. This defied everything they knew about K-9 behavior. Tracy's parents, Emma and David Cooney, stood frozen near the front pew. Emma's face was streaked with tears, her body trembling as she clutched her husband's arm. David stared at the impossible scene, his daughter and the dog who had somehow claimed her as his own, even in death. Officer Marcus Blake pressed against the back wall, his throat tight with dread. He had been Stahl's handler for 5 years. He'd seen his partner track suspects through darkness, detect explosives in crowded spaces, remain calm under gunfire. But he'd never seen Stahl like this. Protective, possessive, and radiating a tension that made Blake's instincts scream. The room held its collective breath, waiting. Watching. Wondering why a police dog refused to accept what everyone else had already grieved, that little Tracy Cooney was gone forever. None of them realized that sometimes, loyalty sees what logic cannot. And sometimes, the truth is buried so deep that only unconditional love can dig it free. 6 months earlier, on a crisp Tuesday morning in March, everything had been different. The precinct bustled with its usual chaos, officers rushing between calls, phones ringing, the constant hum of police radios crackling with updates. But outside the chain-link fence that bordered the K-9 training yard, a small figure stood perfectly still. Tracy Cooney pressed her face against the metal links, her breath fogging the cold steel as she watched the German shepherds practice their drills. She'd been walking to school when she heard the sharp commands and barking, and something had drawn her off the sidewalk like a magnet. Her backpack hung loose on her tiny shoulders, and her blonde hair caught the morning sunlight as she stood transfixed. Blake noticed her first during water break. "Hey there," he called gently, walking toward the fence with Stahl at his heel. "You okay, sweetheart?" The little girl's eyes went wide and she took a step back, her mouth opening soundlessly before snapping shut again. Classic signs Blake recognized from community outreach, another shy kid overwhelmed by a uniformed officer. But something extraordinary happened next. Stahl, who'd been trained since puppyhood to maintain professional distance from civilians during duty hours, suddenly sat down directly in front of the fence. His ears perked forward with interest, and his dark eyes fixed on the little girl with an intensity Blake had never seen directed at anyone except suspects or handlers. Tracy's fear melted away instantly. She stepped closer to the fence and whispered something so soft Blake couldn't hear it. But Stahl's tail began to wag, just slightly, controlled, as if he was trying to contain his excitement while remaining on duty. "That's Stahl," Blake said, crouching down to the girl's eye level. "He's usually all business, but he seems to like you." Tracy's voice came out barely above a breath. "He has kind eyes." From that moment, everything changed. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, Tracy appeared at the fence during training breaks. She brought homemade chocolate chip cookies in wrinkled paper bags, pressing them through the chain links while whispering stories about her day, her dreams, her fears about the kids at school who made fun of her silence. Stahl would sit motionless during these sessions, his head tilted as if genuinely listening to every word. Blake found himself scheduling training around Tracy's visits, watching in amazement as his rigorously disciplined partner transformed into something softer, more patient. "I've never seen him respond to anyone like that," Blake told Emma Cooney when she finally came looking for her daughter one afternoon. "It's like he understands her." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she watched Tracy actually giggle, when Stahl gently took a cookie from her small fingers. "She doesn't have friends at school," Emma admitted. "The other children don't understand why she doesn't talk much. But with him, she doesn't need to perform," Blake finished, understanding completely. Those precious months had been filled with such simple joy. Tracy's quiet laughter. Stahl's patient devotion. The way they communicated in a language that needed no words. Now, staring at his partner's grief-stricken form curled around that still little body, Blake finally understood why Stahl couldn't let go. Some bonds transcend even death itself. The afternoon of September 14th had been supposed to follow a familiar pattern. Blake guided his patrol car through the residential neighborhoods with Stahl alert in the back, the route taking them past Tracy Street like it always did during the 3 p.m. shift. Stahl would press his nose against the window, watching for that small figure with blonde curls who sometimes waved from her front porch. But at 2:47 p.m., dispatch crackled through with new orders. "Route change. Head to the industrial district instead," reported suspicious activity near the warehouses. Blake frowned, glancing at his partner in the rearview mirror. Stahl's ears had perked up at the sound of the radio, but now he settled back down with what almost looked like disappointment. "Sorry, boy," Blake muttered, turning the wheel. "Duty calls." At 3:13 p.m., everything shattered. All units, officer-involved incident, Maple Street between 5th and 6th. Child pedestrian struck. Medical en route. Blake's blood turned to ice. Maple Street. That was Tracy's block. His hands moved on autopilot, flipping the sirens, punching the accelerator. Beside him, Stahl began to whine, a sound Blake had never heard from him before. The scene materialized like a nightmare made solid. Cole's patrol SUV sat at an angle in the middle of the street, driver's door hanging open. A small pink bicycle lay crushed against the curb. And there, on the pavement, a tiny form covered by a white emergency blanket that couldn't hide the horror beneath it. Blake stumbled from his vehicle, his training fighting against the scream building in his chest. Not her. Please God, not her. Cole stood off to the side, his face pale, his uniform spotless. She ran out chasing a ball, he said, his voice flat with shock as paramedics worked frantically. I swerved but couldn't stop in time. It happened so fast. Jesus Christ, Blake, it happened so fast. The paramedics pulled back at 3:31 p.m. No pulse. Severe head trauma. Catastrophic internal injuries. A 5-year-old girl who'd been whispering secrets to a police dog just yesterday was gone, reduced to medical terminology and an incident report number. Blake made the mistake of bringing Stahl closer to help secure the perimeter. The moment the German shepherd caught Cole's scent, he lunged with a ferocity that yanked Blake forward. Teeth bared, snarling, straining against the leash with every ounce of his 100 pounds focused on one target, Officer Raymond Cole. Stahl. Heel. Blake wrestled him back, shocked. Easy, boy. Easy. Cole stepped away quickly, his eyes wide. The smell of blood, he said. It's triggering him. Blake nodded, though doubt flickered through his grief. Stahl had worked murder scenes before. He'd never reacted like this, never targeted an officer with such raw, unmistakable hatred. But grief clouds judgment, and tragedy demands simple explanations. So Blake led his partner away from the scene, from the little body being loaded into the coroner's van, from the chalk outline that would haunt Maple Street forever. He never considered that sometimes, the truth doesn't announce itself with evidence and logic. Sometimes it growls. The case file landed on Blake's desk exactly 18 hours after Tracy Cooney's body had been zipped into a black bag. Closed. Accidental death. Officer Raymond Cole cleared of any wrongdoing. The speed of it should have been efficient, professional. Instead, it felt obscene. Blake sat in the empty break room at midnight, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as he flipped through pages that reduced a little girl's life to clinical timestamps and witness statements. Cole's account remained consistent across 3 interviews: child darted into street, no time to break, tragic accident. 2 civilian witnesses corroborated the basic facts. Skid marks measured. Impact angles calculated. Everything aligned into a neat, terrible package. Except it didn't. Not really. Blake couldn't articulate what bothered him. Maybe it was the way Cole's uniform had been spotless despite cradling a dying child. Maybe it was how quickly the detective assigned to review had signed off. Maybe it was just grief making him see shadows where none existed. Or maybe it was the way Stahl still refused to eat. You shouldn't be reading that. Officer Sarah Daniels stood in the doorway, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced down the hallway before stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Especially not alone. Blake looked up, surprised. Daniels worked vehicle logistics, tracking patrol routes, maintaining GPS logs, processing dashcam footage. They'd spoken maybe twice in 5 years. She pulled a chair close, her expression tight. I processed Cole's vehicle that day. Standard protocol for any officer-involved incident. Her fingers drummed against the table. His GPS log doesn't match his story. Blake's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Cole wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Maple Street. His assigned route was 2 miles east, running parallel through the commercial district. But at 3:04 p.m., his vehicle pinged on Maple Street. She paused. 9 minutes before the incident. The words hung in the stale air between them. 9 minutes. Not racing to a call. Not responding to an emergency. Just, there. And the dashcam footage? Blake asked, though he already sensed the answer. Corrupted. Danielle's mouth twisted. Complete technical failure. Every other car in the fleet that day? Crystal clear recordings. Just Cole's camera mysteriously malfunctioned during the exact 15-minute window we need. Blake's hands clenched around the file. That's not possible. Those systems have redundancies. I know. Her voice dropped even lower. I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've seen cameras fail maybe 3 times, and each time we could recover partial data. This? Complete wipe. Like someone knew exactly how to erase it. The autopsy report felt suddenly heavy in Blake's hands. Released within 12 hours. Body cleared for burial immediately. No secondary examination requested. No toxicology beyond standard panels. Why the hurry? Blake heard himself ask. Why close it so fast? Daniels met his eyes, and he saw fear there, the kind that comes from understanding you've stumbled onto something dangerous. Someone wanted this buried, Blake. Question is who and why. She stood, straightening her uniform. Officially, I'm telling you to let this go. Case is closed. And unofficially? She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Unofficially? That dog of yours has better instincts than half the detectives in this building. Her voice hardened. And if you're going to dig, do it quietly. Trust no one inside these walls. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Blake alone with a closed case file and the growing certainty that nothing about Tracy Cooney's death had been accidental at all. The funeral parlor closed at 9, but Blake stayed. He'd pulled strings with the director, an old friend from the academy, explaining that his K-9 partner needed closure. What he didn't say was that Stahl had been standing vigil outside the viewing room for 6 hours straight, refusing food, refusing commands, refusing everything except his self-appointed duty. Now, in the suffocating quiet of night, Blake sat in a folding chair while Stahl maintained his position 3 feet from the small white coffin. The German shepherd's posture was wrong for morning. His ears stood erect, rotating slightly as if tracking sounds Blake couldn't hear. His head cocked at intervals, tilting left then right, the way he did when processing complex scent patterns at crime scenes. She's gone, boy, Blake whispered into the darkness. Whatever you're waiting for, it won't come. Stahl's tail twitched once, acknowledgement without compliance. His dark eyes remained fixed on the coffin with an intensity that made Blake's skin crawl. This wasn't grief. This was something else. Something that set every instinct Blake possessed on fire. He pulled out his phone, staring at Danielle's encrypted message from 2 hours ago, found something. Meet tomorrow after funeral. Come alone. Blake's thumb hovered over the reply button. He was trusting a dog's instinct over an entire investigation. Over witness statements and physical evidence and the collective judgment of decorated detectives. It was insane. It was career suicide. But as he watched Stahl's unwavering vigil, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that his partner saw something everyone else had missed. The funeral began at 11. Blake arrived early, keeping Stahl on a short lead as mourners filtered in. The dog's body vibrated with tension, his attention laser-focused on the crowd. When Officer Raymond Cole entered through the back entrance, Stahl's hackles rose instantly. Cole looked terrible. His uniform hung slightly loose, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled as he signed the guest book. When he glanced up and met Blake's gaze across the room, something flickered in his expression: fear, guilt, or maybe just exhaustion from carrying the weight of a child's death. The service proceeded with excruciating slowness. Hymns sung through tears. The pastor's words about heaven and angels that meant nothing in the face of such senseless loss. Emma Cooney's sobs echoing off stained glass windows. Then came the final viewing. Blake made the mistake of loosening Stahl's lead for just a moment. The German shepherd lunged forward, not attacking, but moving with purpose toward the coffin. Before Blake could react, Stahl had placed his front paws on the edge and pulled himself inside, curling his massive body around Tracy's still form with heartbreaking gentleness. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. But Stahl wasn't looking at Tracy. His eyes locked onto Cole at the back of the room, and that low, menacing growl vibrated through the coffin like a warning bell. Cole's face went white. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His hand shook as he gripped the pew in front of him. Blake caught movement beside Cole, Sergeant Avery from dispatch, leaning in close. Their whispered conversation barely carried across the shocked silence, but Blake's ears, sharpened by years of tactical work, caught fragments. "Shouldn't be here. Just stay calm. Almost over." Emma Cooney broke down completely, her voice raw with anguish. Even her dog can't let her go. Even he can't accept she's really gone. But Blake saw the truth in Stahl's posture. This wasn't denial. This was accusation. Blake moved toward the coffin slowly, his mind racing. Every instinct, every hour of training, every moment of partnership with this animal crystallized into one absolute certainty. Stahl knew something no one else did. And Blake needed to know what that was, before whoever buried this case buried the evidence forever. The coffin lid closed at 2 in the afternoon. Stahl's body went rigid, a tremor running through his powerful frame as the latches clicked into place. For 40 hours he'd maintained his vigil, and now, with Tracy sealed away forever, something inside him finally broke free. He launched himself from the funeral home steps before Blake could tighten his grip on the lead. The leash burned through Blake's palm as he stumbled after his partner, nearly losing his footing on the rain-slicked pavement. Stahl moved with purpose, his nose low to the ground, tracking something only he could detect. "Stahl. Heel." Blake's command went ignored. The German shepherd was working now, every muscle focused on the invisible trail that pulled him forward like a wire under tension. They ran for 6 blocks, past startled pedestrians and honking cars. The residential neighborhood gave way to industrial sprawl, warehouses and storage facilities that bordered the precinct's eastern edge. Stahl's pace never slowed, never wavered, until he skidded to a stop behind a corrugated metal building that reeked of rust and neglect. Blake's heart hammered against his ribs as he caught up. Then he saw what Stahl had found. A black patrol SUV, identical to Cole's vehicle, hidden in the narrow gap between 2 warehouses. Not just similar. Identical. Same model, same year, same department markings partially visible beneath a hasty tarp covering. Blake approached slowly, pulling out his phone to photograph everything. His hands shook as he lifted the tarp's edge. The rear panel showed impact damage, recent, poorly concealed with black touch-up paint that didn't quite match. And there, in the dust coating the bumper, a small handprint. Child-sized. The fingers smudged as if someone had tried to wipe it away but gave up halfway through. Stahl circled the vehicle twice, his growl rumbling deep and continuous. Then his head snapped up, nose testing the air, and he took off again. "Wait, Stahl, wait." Blake sprinted after him, his mind reeling. Two vehicles. Two identical patrol SUVs. Which one had actually struck Tracy? The trail led them straight to the Cooney house. Blake's stomach dropped as Stahl nosed at the basement door, already ajar, the lock mechanism clearly jimmied. The door hung at an odd angle, the wood splintered around the bolt. Jesus Christ, Blake breathed. He should call this in. He should follow protocol. Instead, he pushed the door open and followed his partner into darkness. The basement had been converted into a home office. Emma Cooney's workspace. Or what remained of it. File cabinets hung open, their contents scattered across the floor. The desk drawers had been pulled out and overturned. Papers everywhere, deliberately chaotic, as if someone had searched frantically for something specific. But Stahl ignored the mess. He moved directly to the desk, sat at attention, and fixed his gaze on the computer monitor still glowing with screensaver patterns. Blake touched the mouse. The screen flared to life, showing a security camera interface, multiple feeds from cameras positioned around the Cooney property. Emma must have installed them for safety, recording everything to an external hard drive. His hand trembled as he navigated to the date stamp, September 14th, 2:45 p.m. The footage loaded. Blake's breath caught in his throat as he watched the timestamp tick forward. There was Tracy, playing in the front yard with her stuffed rabbit. There was the street, empty and peaceful in the afternoon sun. At 3:04 p.m., a black patrol SUV rolled slowly down the street. Not speeding. Not responding to a call. Just cruising. Deliberately. The vehicle stopped across from the Cooney house. Parked. Waiting. Blake's finger hovered over the play button, his entire world narrowing to that frozen frame. Stahl's low growl echoed through the ransacked basement like a promise. The truth was about to surface. And it was worse than anyone had imagined. Blake pressed play. The timestamp read 2:52 p.m., 21 minutes before the official incident report claimed Cole had struck Tracy. The black patrol SUV rolled into frame, moving at residential speed but with deliberate slowness, like a predator surveying territory. It passed the Cooney house once, brake lights flaring briefly, then continued to the end of the block before turning around and making a second pass. This time it parked 3 houses down, engine idling, positioned with a clear sightline to Tracy's front yard. Blake's throat constricted. Beside him, Stahl remained perfectly still, as if he understood the weight of what they were watching. At 2:58 p.m., a second figure entered the frame, walking, not driving. The camera angle caught only a partial silhouette, gender and features obscured by a baseball cap and jacket despite the warm September afternoon. The figure paused at the Cooney's fence line, pulled out a phone, and appeared to make a call. The conversation lasted 43 seconds. 2 p.m., Tracy emerged from the house, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, a red rubber ball clutched in her other hand. She began bouncing it against the fence in her front yard, safely enclosed, nowhere near the street, exactly where a careful 5-year-old should play. Blake's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't what the report described. Not even close. At 3:07 p.m., the fence gate swung open. Not from Tracy's touch. Someone opened it from the outside. The camera angle didn't capture who, but the gate moved deliberately, held wide. Tracy's ball bounced through the opening. She hesitated, glancing back at her house, then stepped cautiously toward the sidewalk to retrieve it. She picked up the ball, turned to go back inside, then froze. Her body language changed instantly, shoulders hunching, backing away, her small frame radiating fear. She was looking at something off camera, something that terrified her. The patrol SUV entered the frame at 3:08 p.m. Not swerving. Not braking. Accelerating. Blake's vision tunneled. He wanted to look away but couldn't. The impact occurred at the edge of the camera's field of view, Tracy's small body disappearing behind the vehicle's bulk. But there, in the corner of the frame, a shadow. A second person standing on the sidewalk, watching. The SUV stopped. Cole exited the driver's side, but his movements were controlled, methodical. No panic. No desperate rush to help an injured child. He walked around the vehicle, knelt beside Tracy's body, then looked up as the second figure approached. Together, they appeared to examine her. Then the second figure moved Tracy's bicycle from the yard, where it had been leaning against the fence, and positioned it near the curb, crushing it beneath the SUV's tire. Staging the scene. Creating the narrative of a child who darted into traffic. The timestamp read 3:11 p.m. when the second figure walked away, disappearing off camera. 2 minutes later, Cole pulled out his radio and made the call that would bring Blake and the rest of the department to Maple Street. Blake's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the mouse. His stomach heaved, bile rising in his throat. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. Calculated, premeditated, executed with the cold precision of someone who knew exactly how to manipulate a crime scene. Jesus Christ, Blake whispered, his voice cracking. They hunted her. He ejected the external hard drive, slipping it into his jacket pocket with trembling fingers. Evidence. Proof. The kind that couldn't be corrupted or erased or explained away with convenient technical failures. Stahl pressed against his leg, grounding him, reminding him why they'd come this far. Someone had wanted Tracy Cooney dead. Someone with access to patrol vehicles, dispatch records, and enough authority to bury an investigation within 18 hours. And that someone was still walking free, still wearing a badge, still protected by the very institution Blake had sworn to serve. Blake filed the evidence request at dawn, citing routine case review. The clerk barely looked up as she handed him the box. Most of Tracy's belongings had already been released to her parents. What remained seemed insignificant. Damaged shoes with grass stains, torn fragments of her pink dress, a scraped hair ribbon. Stahl's reaction was immediate. The moment Blake opened the box in the empty conference room, the German shepherd lunged forward, pawing frantically at a sealed evidence bag containing fabric remnants. His whine turned sharp, urgent, the same sound he made when detecting explosives. Easy, boy. What is it? Blake held the bag to the light. A small piece of Tracy's dress, maybe 3 inches square, with discoloration along one edge. Not blood. Something else. Something that left an irregular stain pattern inconsistent with road debris or impact trauma. Daniels arrived 10 minutes later, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd been up all night cross-referencing dispatch logs. She took the fabric, examined it through the plastic, then checked the autopsy report on Blake's laptop. This was never mentioned, she said quietly. No notation about unusual staining. No sample sent for analysis. Her finger traced the abbreviated sections of Harper's report. This whole thing reads like someone was rushing her through it. Dr. Elena Harper agreed to meet them at the county morgue at 6 a.m., before her official shift began. The medical examiner looked like she hadn't slept well since Tracy's autopsy. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the original file. I was told to expedite, Harper admitted, her voice barely audible in the sterile examination room. Assistant Chief Avery himself called. Said the family needed closure, that dragging it out would only cause more pain. She looked up, meeting Blake's eyes. "I've been doing this 23 years. I know when I'm being pressured to look away." Blake placed the fabric on her examination table. "Look again." Harper's secondary examination took 4 hours. New scans. Detailed tissue analysis. Photography of injuries that should have been documented the first time but weren't. When she finally emerged from the examination room, her face had gone pale. "Compression bruising on the throat and chest," Harper said, pulling up images on her tablet. "Linear patterns inconsistent with vehicle impact. And here, petechial hemorrhaging in the conjunctiva." She zoomed in on Tracy's eye tissue. "These are burst blood vessels caused by oxygen deprivation." Blake felt his world tilt. "What are you saying?" "This child died from asphyxiation before the car struck her." Harper's voice cracked. "Someone restrained her, held something over her face until she stopped breathing, then staged the accident to cover it. The vehicle impact was post-mortem, or close enough that she couldn't have fought back." Daniels pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Harper typed rapidly, her anger overriding protocol. "I'm amending my official report. Cause of death: homicide by asphyxiation. Manner: murder. This should have been caught immediately." She looked at Blake with something like desperation. "Someone made sure I wouldn't look too closely. And I let them." Back at the precinct, Blake retrieved Tracy's personal effects from property storage, her backpack, still containing crayons and a juice box that would never be drunk. Stahl nosed through the contents methodically until his paw caught on something in the interior pocket. A lapel pin. Police issue. The kind worn only by command staff. Blake turned it over in his palm, his blood running cold as he read the engraved number on the back, Badge 0147. Assistant Chief Robert Avery. The man who'd ordered Blake's route change that afternoon. The man who'd pressured Harper to rush the autopsy. The man who'd been whispering to Cole at the funeral. The second figure in the security footage. Blake's hand closed around the pin until the metal bit into his palm. Evidence. Undeniable. Damning. They hadn't just murdered a child. They'd tried to bury her twice. Stahl's nose worked the lapel pin for 30 seconds before his head snapped up, body going rigid with purpose. He took off across the precinct parking lot, pulling Blake toward the restricted area behind the main building where maintenance equipment was stored. The shed sat tucked against the fence line, anonymous and forgotten, exactly the kind of place no one looked twice at. Blake exchanged glances with Daniels. Unauthorized entry into department property without a warrant. Career ending if they were wrong. Prison time if they weren't. Do it, Daniels said quietly. The lock was cheap, civilian grade. Blake forced it with a pry bar in under 10 seconds. The door swung open on rusted hinges, revealing darkness that smelled of stale air and something else, obsession given physical form. Blake's flashlight swept across the interior. Not maintenance equipment. A surveillance station. Monitors, hard drives, file boxes stacked floor to ceiling. And there, tacked to a corkboard like hunting trophies, photographs of Emma Cooney. Hundreds of them. At the grocery store. At her car. Through her living room window. Jesus Christ, Daniels whispered, pulling a file from the nearest box. The harassment complaint, dated 6 months ago. Emma's statement detailed in painful specificity. Unwanted phone calls, Avery appearing at her workplace, comments about her body that made her skin crawl. The file was stamped resolved, no further action. But it hadn't been resolved. The surveillance logs proved Avery had ordered patrol units to pass Emma's house 17 times per day. He'd accessed her personnel records from when she'd worked dispatch 3 years ago. He'd documented her routine with the precision of a stalker who'd crossed from obsession into something murderous. Blake's boot kicked something soft. He aimed his flashlight down. Tracy's things. Her pink sneakers with the light-up soles. Her backpack with the butterfly patches. And there, nestled among her belongings like a predator's prize, her stuffed rabbit, the one she'd been holding when she died. You shouldn't have come here. Blake spun around. Assistant Chief Robert Avery filled the doorway, his silhouette backlit by afternoon sun. His hand rested casually near his service weapon, and his expression carried the dangerous calm of a man with nothing left to lose. It was all documented, Avery said conversationally. I ordered Cole to give Emma a message. Make her understand what happens when you refuse a man in uniform. Scare her into dropping the complaint. His jaw tightened. Cole was supposed to wait until she was alone. But Tracy came outside, Blake said, his voice hollow. Cole panicked. Grabbed the kid to keep her quiet while he dealt with Emma. Avery stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The girl wouldn't stop struggling. Cole held her too tight, too long. By the time I got there, she wasn't breathing. Danielle's hand moved toward her weapon. So you staged an accident. It was supposed to be a warning. Avery's voice rose, defensive. Cole went too far. But what was I going to do? Let one mistake destroy everything? Emma would have dropped it eventually. The kid was just. Stahl's growl cut through the confession like a blade. Avery's hand went for his gun. Blake shouted something, but Stahl was already moving. 100 pounds of trained fury launched across the shed, teeth finding Avery's wrist before the weapon cleared its holster. They went down in a tangle of snarling rage and human screaming. Something metallic clattered across the concrete floor. Blake's flashlight caught it, a small locket on a broken chain. Tracy's locket. The one Emma had reported missing from her daughter's body. Avery had taken a trophy. Sirens erupted outside. Daniels lowered her phone, her face grim. I called it in before we entered. Told them everything. Backup flooded through the door, officers Blake had worked with for years, their faces transforming from confusion to horror as they took in the surveillance photos, the evidence, their assistant chief pinned beneath a police dog with blood running from his arm. Avery looked up at Blake, and there was no remorse in his eyes. Only rage at being caught. She should have just said yes, Avery hissed through gritted teeth. Blake's fist connected with his jaw before anyone could stop him. Blake's radio erupted mid-arrest, cutting through the chaos of officers photographing evidence and reading Avery his rights. All units, urgent call from county morgue. Repeat, urgent call. Blake's hand shot to the radio. This is Unit 12. Go ahead. The dispatcher's voice carried an edge of hysteria. Attendant reports. Jesus, Blake, he's reporting body movement. Tracy Cooney. They're saying her fingers moved during transfer prep. Time stopped. The shed, the arrests, the evidence, everything fell away. Blake's vision narrowed to a single, impossible thought. Get her to County General. Now. He was already running, Stahl racing beside him, Daniels shouting coordinates into her phone. The body had never made it to cold storage. Standard protocol, bodies held for 24 hours before processing. The attendant had been preparing paperwork when he'd seen it, the smallest twitch of her index finger against the white sheet. Blake burst through the hospital's emergency entrance 17 minutes later. The trauma team had already started work, machines beeping, doctors shouting medical terminology he couldn't process. But there, on the monitor, impossibly, unmistakably, a heartbeat. Faint, irregular, barely registering, but there. Dr. Harper arrived within the hour, her face pale with shock and something like redemption. She pulled Blake into a consultation room, her hands still trembling as she reviewed the scans. Severe trauma induced a catatonic state, Harper explained, her voice tight. The combination of asphyxiation and psychological shock, the terror of being grabbed, held down, it triggered a protective response. Her body essentially shut down to minimal function. Respiratory rate so low it was undetectable without specialized equipment. The paramedics did exactly what they were trained to do based on what they could observe, Harper said firmly. No pulse they could find. No breathing they could detect. She looked dead because she was barely alive. Her body was preserving itself. She met his eyes. The coffin actually helped. The stable temperature, the enclosed space, it prevented her from declining further. Another day and we would have lost her. Blake sank into a chair, his entire body shaking. Stahl knew. Dogs can detect heartbeats humans can't hear, chemical changes we can't smell. Harper's voice softened. He knew she was alive. That's why he wouldn't leave. They let Stahl into the ICU recovery room 3 days later, after Tracy had been weaned off the ventilator. Blake guided his partner to the bed where the small figure lay surrounded by monitors and tubes. Stahl moved with unusual gentleness, placing his front paws on the bed frame, his muzzle inches from Tracy's pale face. Her eyes fluttered. Opened. Focused on the familiar dark eyes watching over her. Her hand, so small and fragile with 4 lines trailing from it, reached up and buried itself in Stahl's fur. Her lips moved, sound barely there. Stahly. Emma Cooney's scream of joy echoed through the entire ward. She collapsed beside the bed, gathering her daughter and the dog into her arms, sobbing words that made no sense and perfect sense all at once. David stood behind them, tears streaming down his face, his hand on Stahl's head as if the dog were an angel made flesh. Blake watched from the doorway as Stahl rested his massive head gently on Tracy's small hand, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. The bond that had transcended death itself, validated. Proven. Unbreakable. 6 months later, Blake stood on the courthouse steps watching Avery and Cole being led away in chains. Murder charges. Conspiracy. Attempted cover-up. The prosecution had enough evidence to guarantee they'd never see freedom again. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the small figure walking slowly down the hospital's front steps, her hand buried deep in Stahl's thick fur, whispering secrets only he could hear. Her recovery had been long and painful. Physical therapy, counseling, nightmares that woke her screaming. But Stahl had been there for every session, every setback, every small victory. Tracy looked up at Blake and smiled, the first real smile he'd seen since she'd woken up. "Stahly says you're a good person," she whispered. "He says you listened when nobody else would." Blake crouched down, his throat tight. "He's the hero, sweetheart. I just finally learned to trust him." Tracy pressed her face into Stahl's neck, and the German shepherd's tail wagged with pure contentment. Sometimes, loyalty doesn't just see what logic cannot. Sometimes, it saves the very life everyone else has given up on. And sometimes, love refuses to let go, even when death itself demands surrender.